Be yourself positive. Just another mindset.
Hello, friends, and welcome to a new episode of the Just Another Mindset podcast, the show that inspires you to change and live a more exciting life. My name is Ismael, and each week I bring to you a relevant conversation, message, or topic that will not only entertain you, but help you to change towards a more meaningful and satisfying life, individually and collectively. Let us get inspired and embrace collective changes for the better. In today's solo episode, I want to share with you a few techniques and tools that I use myself whenever I face a difficult or tough decision. So I really do hope that the different steps, the different approaches that I discuss give you some value and help you to take better decisions for yourself. And if in fact they do, you can go for a very easy decision either before or latest after listening to this podcast episode and show your support. Subscribe on YouTube, and if you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcast, please make sure to give this podcast, the Just Another Mindset, a 5-star rating, and know that you will support me creating more content like that, and also know that it will be much easier for other people to find this kind of content if you share that you in fact like it. Have fun today. And with that, a warm welcome to another episode of the Just Another Mindset podcast. And in today's solo episode, I want to talk about tough or difficult decisions. And due to the fact that this is a very personal topic for myself lately, and to be fair, it has been over the past 30-some years, and I developed for myself certain tools and techniques and processes or approaches that I would like to share with you today, because let's face it, all of us will have to deal with difficult and tough decisions, and I guess we should all be equipped with the best tools to take the best, if there is such a thing, decisions for our lives. And that said, why should you care to listen to today's episode? Well, first of all, tough decisions are inevitable and all of us face them in our lives. Difficult decisions are by definition very impactful on the future of your life, and hence it definitely does make sense to have good tools to evaluate and then also to move forward. And that being said, tough decisions also have the potential to make you overthink and make you get stuck by doing so. And in today's episode, we want to discuss how each and everybody of us can avoid being stuck and not moving forward. Because after all, postponing a decision and avoiding a decision does not help in most cases. So what are the 3 main takeaways of today's episode? The first one is that it's super important to get clear on what you really want and to evaluate your options. Second, you should never choose an option because you are supposed to do so or because it is what other people would do. And third, you can always remember that doing something trumps doing nothing. So this is the section where I usually credit authors of books and articles that are read on this particular topic. And even though I have, of course, read a lot of personal development, career advice, literature, listened to hundreds, if not thousands of podcasts myself, there is none that I would like to highlight today. But obviously, all the information that I am sharing today with you via this podcast itself is somewhat an agglomeration of the information and of the techniques that I learned about myself over the past years, let's just call it. So let's start with defining what a difficult or a tough decision is, after all. It can be a career change. It could be moving places, either in a city, in a country, or even considering to change the continent that you live on. It could be buying or selling property or different types of asset. And it could also be beginning or ending a relationship, either an intimate one or a close friendship. Can also be placing a loved one into a full-time care facility or decide about becoming a parent or adopting a child. And last but not least, retirement at any age is another one of those examples. So why do some decisions feel so difficult for us humans? Well, for me, there's 3 reasons that make decisions super impactful. The first one is that your personal stakes in a decision are very high. The second is if there's 2 or even more options that weigh the same in your mind. And the third one is that this decision brings back up unwanted and unhelpful memories and fears. This could be consciously, but this could also very well be subconsciously happening. And before looking into different tools and techniques on how to take good decisions, let's also state that avoiding to take a decision is a decision by itself. Because when we are faced with a difficult decision, it can be very tempting to go the easy route and just procrastinate and not to take a decision. And for me, the greatest myth of decision-making processes is that when we are faced, for example, with 2 options, that there's always the third option of not doing anything and taking the decision not to act. But to me, indecision and procrastination, in fact, do not push out the pain that you are facing or the adversity that you are facing to a future day, but they multiply that pain by spreading it across every day and every minute until you take your future decision. So first of all, for me at least, not taking a decision is not an option, because this will make you stuck, this will make you feel bad and being stuck, and this in most cases will not help. And I'm not saying you should jump to conclusions, and I'm not saying you should take decisions as fast as possible, but neglecting and avoiding the necessity to take a decision usually does not end up well. At least for myself. The first technique I want to call out is to think in years, and certainly not in days. A sure sign of immaturity is to take decisions with only the present moment in mind. So please think about the long-term consequences of the decisions that you are taking today or tomorrow. And also commit to your long-term thought. And before jumping to conclusions, please evaluate and compare the long-term effects and consequences that the decisions will have down the road. Not for the next week, not for the next month, but rather for the next couple of years. And for myself, it's also good to remember that sometimes we have to make short-term sacrifices or take a step back because the long-term benefits can far outreach the immediate sacrifices. Keep that in mind when taking a decision. Sometimes it looks like taking a step back, but after all, this step back will allow you to gain a new perspective and to reach a new level after going forward again. Second is to evaluate whether or not it's a head choice or a heart choice. A head choice is a decision that makes a lot of sense on paper. A heart choice is one that speaks to your soul and one that meets a need or a longing of yours. For example, a bad relationship mistake can take place overnight when only looking at the very short-term benefits of such. And on the other hand, when choosing the right partner only based on a checklist of certain traits and characteristics, one may leave out the importance of having an emotional or spiritual bond with that very person. So the best decisions usually have an emotional component, but also make sense on a rational level. And sometimes it really does help just to distinguish whether or not this decision is a hard decision or a head decision and move along from there. What usually really helps for myself is to identify the different parts in myself that want different decisions. When facing difficult decisions, it is very likely that different parts within yourself want different things and want different outcomes. When faced with a difficult decision, one part of yourself may urge for safety and neglect the fact that paying a small price today may guarantee, or at least make it much more likely, to live a much happier life down the road. Remember, we want to think in a long-term perspective for decisions that are made for life. Another part may urge for change and hence jump into adventurous or risky maneuvers too quickly. And another part inside of you might urge for idealism or perfectionism, which usually does not exist. So only settling for the very best opportunity, for the very best decision, is something that usually doesn't work either. In practical terms, that means try to write down the different parts inside of you and what they aspire. Try to really find a solution that talks to all or at least most of the parts inside of you. And for me, it really does help to acknowledge the different voices, the different parts inside of myself, in order to incorporate all of them into a decision-making process. All of the parts and all of the voices inside of yourself matter, and all of them will speak up sooner or later. So appreciate that and take them into consideration. Take a sheet of paper and write down the different parts, the different ideas that those parts have, and see if there is a common ground where all the different parts inside of you can meet. If so, you are very likely to have found a good decision for this difficult change, for that difficult situation that you are facing already. So for me, the simple act of recognizing the different parts within yourself already helps to find a solution that is more effective and that is more lasting, and that helps you to live a happier and more exciting life along the way. Another step is to create some distance from this particular decision. To begin with, it is to let go of your most preferred option for a moment and to look at all the different options objectively. We will later talk about a very practical way on how to do that. Another way is to imagine that you are giving advice to a friend of yours who is facing this particular decision. Imagine a friend of yours is coming to you in trust and asking you for advice. Which advice would you give that friend? Is it the same advice that you would also give to yourself? And last but not least, you can also try to picture whether or not this decision will make you happy. Picture yourself with 50 years old, with 80 years old, or even on your deathbed, and question whether or not this decision was a good decision to go forward. If it feels right, and if you can picture yourself being supportive of that very decision, again, you have a clue whether or not you should go for it. If this decision feels like something you don't want to remember back to, then this decision is probably not the right way forward. The next step is to really identify the different options you have and to list out all the objectives and weigh and score them. What do I mean by that? When making a difficult decision, it is, for me at least, super important to understand the different objectives that are behind this decision and to cross-check whether or not which option satisfies all those objectives. For example, if I decide to move to a new place or even back home, what are the different objectives behind that decision? Or what are the different components that make up my decision-making process? It could be because I want more space or because I want a safer neighborhood. It could be because I have better job opportunities in one particular place. Or because I have better access to infrastructure or transportation. And it could also be access to nature or the proximity to friends and family. And most likely, it's a combination of all these and potentially many more. But first thing to do is to write down all the objectives. Why do you want to take a decision? And what are the objectives behind moving place in this particular example? Once you've listed all your objectives, we can go to the next step of this exercise. And that is to use a weighting system to score the different objectives. This might sound a little bit numerical or analytical, but after all, this is a decision-making process that I have used for many of my clients' situations, difficulties, and that I have also used for myself when in doubt whether or not to pursue a certain path or whether or not to take a decision towards that direction or another. And in fact, I have a book here, which is one of my notebooks, and it says first used in 2819, so a couple of years old. And I remember taking it to Lisbon, Portugal back then, and I did list different objectives. I was back then thinking about a career change, and I can just read out a few of those objectives. The first one would be colleagues. There's prestige, development, learning curve, strategy, technology, work life, income, teamwork, side benefits, vacation, traveling, secondment. And those are basically the objectives that I wrote down for making a career change. This is what we did in the last step. In the next step, what we want to do is to weigh those objectives and give criteria for those objectives. So first of all, write down all the objectives. What I just read out to you can be very different for yourself. Could be salary, job title, learning opportunities, team, environment. There are so many just for the example of changing a career or changing a job. And obviously, they will differ for other difficult or life-changing decisions. Make a list of all the objectives. Let's start with that. The second step is to give all of those objectives a percentage. So you have 100% overall. How important is that particular objective to you? Let's go back to my examples. Let's say I rated colleagues, prestige, development, learning curve, and strategy. Let's say I have those 5. Let's say colleagues qualifies for 30% of my decision-making process. Development is another 30%. Learning curve 15%, which makes it 75. Income is another 15%, and prestige is 10%. That makes an overall of 100% divided among those 5 objectives. Obviously, if you take more objectives, the percentages may vary. But understand for yourself how important is that very objective for yourself. And once you've assigned percentages to the different objectives, take a look at the list again and check whether or not it's accurate, whether or not you see one objective that has gotten a too high number or a too low number of percentage. And the third and final step of this weighted scoring system is to assign marks. So let's assume you have 2 or even 3 different options. What you've just done is you wrote down your objectives with the weighted score, with how important are those objectives for yourself. Now try to picture and go through one option after another. How do you think will this option satisfy your objective? Meaning, let's mark your objectives depending on the option you go for. I usually use a scale from 1 to 10 here. If you say that, for example, let's stick with those 5 objectives. You have colleagues, prestige, development, learning curve, and salary. In option A, you earn quite a bit more money, so you give it an 8 or a 9 in the salary. Though in this very job, the colleagues or the learning curve are fairly low, so you give it 3s or 4s. Vice versa, in option B, you earn much less money, so let's give it a 4. But after all, the development and the learning curve are much higher for yourself, so you give it high numbers there. Once you've completed that step for the different options with all the different objectives, and you multiply the objectives times the marks that you have given, you will get a numerical score that you can then compare and look at. You will have a total score for option A, B, C, and however many options you have chosen. And this should give you an indication, given that you have assigned the right percentages to your objectives and that you found all your objectives, whether or not you should move forward with option A, B, C, or Z. For me, this approach really works best if you have the choice between 2 fairly similar options, meaning 2 job roles, 5 job roles, or 2 countries, 2 places to move to. If the decision to be made actually involves very different components, meaning either I take a job role there or I move to that very country, it's a little bit more difficult to clarify those objectives. And one more time, it's also important to understand that it's usually not helpful to take all the important decisions at the same time. Focus on one life-changing decision at a time and go from there. Another tool that I want to share with you guys that works really well for myself is to talk to friends, family, and so-called experts about those changes. So to my closest friends, once more, thank you so much for all the support that you have been giving me over the past weeks and month when thinking about difficult decisions and for being there. And the same is true for my family. For me, it can really help talking out loud ideas that are in my head and that I share those ideas with someone that I trust. Speaking those ideas out loud takes it away from the hypothetical what-if scenario into something more concrete, into something that makes more sense, and into something that hopefully sounds actionable. If it doesn't sound actionable, this might not be the best decision to move forward. Asking close friends for advice will give you a good indication of whether or not this decision is a good one, first of all, and it will also foster the relationships that you have with your closest friends and family members. And one component that is often neglected is to also talk to people who are not as involved into your decision-making processes and into your daily life. This could be external experts, or this could also be rather acquaintances than super close friends, because they might give you a different perspective and a very different lens through which they evaluate your situation, and hence can give you another advice, an advice that you have not talked through multiple times with your closest friends, with your closest family members. So that also helps me oftentimes to consult with someone whom I either have not talked for long, who is not my very closest friends, but who I still value the opinion of. And this has helped me multiple times to gain different perspectives on decision-making processes that I thought were stuck or didn't help me going forward. So you can talk to friends, you can talk to family members, of course, and you can also talk to professional advisors, such as career coaches or therapists, for example. And another hidden gem, I would call it, that I have encountered fairly early in my life, but what I also like to do is to ask older people for advice. Because often we neglect the fact that those decisions we are facing have been decided multiple, if not millions or billions of times by the people in the generations before us. If you have somebody older whom you trust, if you have somebody who you can approach, I really advise you to do so. Usually older people have a huge amount of personal experience that we can share with. Yes, times have changed and you do not have to go forward with each and all the decisions that another generation is telling you. But there is so many different decisions, there is so many different choices that other people have already done. And this is not only people from our generation, but this is especially true for people from other generations. Find somebody who is 10, 20, or even 50 years older. Consult with them, sit with them, and at least hear them out what they have to say about your decision-making process. I suggest to do this fairly early in your decision-making process because this can again create a very different perspective on things that you can use to craft your best options available. Step number 7 is to consider if, or rather, how you can survive if disappointed. What are the consequences if things do not play out the way that you would like to? Usually, there is not only one consequence or one area of consequence. You will have a financial consequence. Will you learn from it and gain anyways? Or is there a very impactful and maybe not so easy to deal with failure risk? What are the financial costs and impacts for yourself? And what is the emotional setback if this decision is not playing out? What happens if you fail with yourself and with your emotions? And what is the time and energy lost? And those all sound fairly negative, but also think about what can you learn in the worst case? I have said that multiple times in my podcast, so those who are listening more regularly, please excuse myself. But what I like to do is I picture the worst case scenario in order to frame the possibility that everything can go wrong, in order to understand how I would feel about this worst case scenarios. Can I survive it? How do I get away if that actually takes place? And then from there, once I've done that, I focus on the best case scenario and how to get there. Luckily, so far in my life, I have never ended up with the worst case scenario, but it helps you to understand whether or not you could live with failure, whether or not you could live with taking the wrong decision today or not. If this is something that you would feel super miserable about, if this is something that you could not bounce back from, then probably it's a too risky, too adventurous, or too whatever you want to call it decision, and you should not take it. Another question I like to ask myself in that regard is, who are the people that will help you regardless of if you fail or succeed? Maybe you can talk to them beforehand you take those decisions. Don't take support, emotional, financial, or any other resources for granted. If you are facing a big decision and there is a big risk of failure that you cannot handle yourself, make sure to take that decision with the people who are closest to you, with the people who you think might help you. This can boost, of course, your confidence in this very decision. And this can also make sure that you are not being sad about unmet expectations after all. And if all that doesn't work, you can just flip a coin. I'm not too serious about that one, but I am. Well, if you have different options and you weighted them and you scored them and you talked them through with your different friends and you get different opinions, you get different personal experiences from older ones, and you really do not know on how to move forward, well, you're officially stuck. Well, in the end, there is, again, different things that we can do. Seek professional support, seek French support, or just start acting. Again, this is something we're going to talk about in a little bit. But another decision is to actually flip a coin. If you have two options to choose from, Assign each of those options to one side of the coin and flip that damn coin. And see how you react, how your body reacts once the coin lands. Do you feel relieved when the coin tells you to go for option A? Or do you feel immediate anxious feelings coming up when the coin landed the way that you thought would be your preferred option? You can read your emotions and you can understand of how do you react to the choice that somebody else did for you. If you cannot make this decision yourself, use the coin to check your reactions of your body and of your emotions for option A or B. This can actually help you to frame you into the right direction, because sometimes you may think that option A is preferred, you flip a coin, you go for option A, and it really feels wrong. Well, guess what? Usually it's not the right direction to go. Likewise, the same can be true that you think, probably option B is not as sexy or as smooth or as easy, but if you flip the coin and it shows option B, it feels like a relief that you didn't have to unturn all those stones, that you didn't have to make this huge change. If that is in fact the feeling, listen to your body and listen to your heart. And that's it. The last advice I have for today's solo episode on how to take tough decisions is to find other solutions and to think outside the box. If you're hesitant to move forward with option A, B, or C for a long time, and you're hesitant to take a decision towards one or another direction, it is likely that neither of those decisions is really what you want. You can take some time to sit back and use all the work that you have done. You have talked to different people, you have evaluated the different objectives that lay behind, but maybe there is something that's more outside of the box. Can you combine option A and option C? Where is an overlap that actually seems more likable, that seems more in alignment with what you really want? If your decision-making process takes a long time, there is a great chance that neither of the presented solutions is what you should go for. I know it sounds harsh, and I know it's sometimes not what we are looking for. We look for easy solutions, right? But after all, sit back, go back to the drawing table and imagine what could be. And once you've done that, I'm very, very confident that you will find the right solution for yourself. Have a good, deep, and non-judgmental view on what's inside of you, and listen to your instinct. If this decision is the right one, you will know that it is, and you will feel that you want to move forward with it. And that leads me to a little summary of today's episode on how to take difficult decisions, which I hope creates value for you. And if it does, and if you are facing a difficult situation in your life, please be assured that you can always reach out. You can reach out to your friends, to your family, and you can of course also reach out to myself and to the Just Another Mindset community if you want to have an external viewpoint on a decision-making process. Let's recap what we talked about. First, get clear on your goals and what you really want. Second, don't choose something just because you're supposed to do it. Third, remember that doing something trumps doing nothing. And fourth, practice being decisive and start acting, even if it's small things in your life. And always keep in mind that no one takes 100% smart decisions all the times in their lives. We all have taken wrong decisions, and we all have moved the wrong direction. But it is likely that we found out about doing so by doing something. We date the wrong people, we stay in the wrong job longer than we should, or we just ordered the wrong dessert. But in the end, action always works in your favor, while inaction never does. When you delay making a decision because you're afraid of messing up, nothing will change for you. And this is likely a state where you don't want to be trapped. So when you're proactive and you decide that you want to move forward with something, that's usually one of the best decisions to take. One thing that I like to do is to, after evaluating the different steps that we've discussed in today's podcast episode, Take small steps towards the most anticipated option and see how it feels. If you fail after 3 days, 3 weeks, or 3 months, good, you've learned something. Figure out whether or not you can deal with failure and then start acting. Start moving forward, because if you do not act at all, if you avoid a decision, it will not help you. It will multiply your misery and it will not help you to get unstuck and move forward. And with that, I have a few questions that may or may not help you on top of what we've discussed in today's solo episode on how to take difficult decisions. Consider whether or not you will be able to look into the mirror with a happy face the next day, in a month from now, or in 50 years from now. When you meditate and listen to your instincts, what do they tell you? Who will it affect, and what does your heart tell you to do? What is the most pleasurable choice, and where do you have most fun overall? And which learnings do you have from past mistakes? I hope that today's podcast episode on taking difficult decisions really helped you to get a more practical approach if in case you are facing a difficult situation yourself right now. If you enjoy this podcast and learn from it, please feel free to share this episode with a friend or two, and make sure to subscribe to the Just Another Mindset podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please use the next 10 seconds to give the Just Another Mindset podcast a rating, and know that you will help me to create more meaningful content like this, and also that it will help other people to find this content and get inspired as well. If there is any future topic or guest that you would like to hear more about on the Just Another Mindset podcast, please let me know by leaving a comment on YouTube or sending a mail directly to contact@ismaelwondergarten.com. And if nobody told you lately, be reminded that you are worthy, you matter, and you can achieve anything.